It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I am Jeff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. 1953's The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms is kind of a big deal. I mean, it's such a big deal, I'm surprised I waited this long to talk about it on an episode of Monster Mondays. Well, that day has finally come. In a 1951 issue of the Saturday Evening Post, The Foghorn by Ray Bradbury tells the story of, a foghorn attracting a sea monster. Initially, the story was called The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. However, the title was changed to avoid confusion with a movie in the works called Monster from Beneath the Sea. Then, when Ray Harryhausen and Ray Bradbury were hanging out during the production of Monster from Beneath the Sea, Bradbury was invited to read the script. In one of the scenes, he saw similarity to a short story by total happenstance. And when Bradbury told producers Jack Dietz and Hal E. Chester, they moved quickly to buy the rights. Once they had that, they changed the name of their movie to The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. Now, one of the things about the foghorn was that what attracted the sea monster was the fact that the foghorn was almost like a mating call to the monster. The sea monster falls in love with the foghorn. So the short story isn't exactly all that similar to the movie itself, but it ends up being close enough to where, at one point, the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms attacks a lighthouse, which is presumably would have a foghorn on it, all of that sort of stuff. But, anyway, the after release, Harryhausen's Rhedosaurus was kind of panned by paleontologists for being kind of unrealistic, but it would have a major pop culture impact. The movie is typically called one of the best B movies of the 1950s, and it's a pretty special movie all in all. But according to reports, 1954's Godzilla was heavily inspired by this movie. Supposedly, as the story goes, producer Tomoyuki Tanaka was flying back to Tokyo when he saw The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, and he immediately canceled the film that Toho was working on and shifted gears to make one of the most famous movies and famous big guy monsters of them all, Godzilla. But for now, let's dive off the deep end and talk about The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. The movie begins with an introduction to Operation Experiment. It's a nuclear bomb test in the Arctic Circle. Physicist Thomas Nesbitt, after the explosion of the nuke, ponders what effect will all these bombs that have been going off have in cumulative terms. And that would be that the blast would have awakened a 200-foot creature called the Rhedosaurus. Now, the carnivorous dinosaur was stuck in suspended animation in the ice of the Arctic, and it's quite angry and very hungry. Of the members of the expedition outside with Nesbitt, kind of checking on stuff after the bomb was exploded, he is the only one to survive the resurrection of the Rhedosaurus. And when he tries to explain what it is he saw, no one really believes him. In fact, it's kind of dismissed as just simply traumatic hallucination. Now, while Nesbitt tries to get people to believe him, the Rhedosaurus has started kind of wreaking a little bit of havoc. It attacks a fishing ship, actually a couple of fishing ships in the Canadian waters, before seemingly heading directly for the United States eastern seaboard. Now, speaking of the seaboard there, in New York City, Nesbitt visits Professor Thurgood Elson at the Natural History Museum, and he says that they need to basically study the creature. But the professor says that that takes a lot of time to raise the funds and building the case to justify such an expedition. While it is entirely possible that a creature could hibernate like a bear, even creatures that were frozen for centuries that still had all of its body mass, fur, and muscle, and so forth. I mean, those were dead creatures that, when thawed, they were still dead. And with bears, they end up using a lot of their body mass. Like they eat up a bunch before they go into hibernation, and then they survive off of what they ate, and it kind of takes away from their body mass, which means that, for a season, that's fine. You can live like that, but for, millions of years, maybe not too possible. And, when prehistoric creatures were found in the ice, and while, yes, there, was still, something to their body, to their hide and hair that would all, basically still almost look like it's living, those creatures didn't get up and move around afterwards. They were dead. But the professor's pretty assistant and paleontologist in training, Lee Hunter, knows who Nesbitt is. She went to one of his seminars about nuclear physics when he first arrived in New York. And so she knows that this Swiss guy is actually quite brilliant and very unlikely somebody who's just crazy making up a story about a dinosaur freed from the glaciers of the North Pole. So with her help, Nesbitt identifies the Rhedosaurus, and together they find a sailor who also claimed to see the monster. And they take this sailor from Canada to Professor Elson, who finally agrees to begin an official investigation. And just after the investigation officially kicks off with Professor Elson, the Rhedosaurus attacks and destroys a lighthouse off the coast of Massachusetts. So Elson basically believes the Rhedosaurus is following ocean currents, and he thinks the next place it will attack is New York City. And knowing how it's migrating from the North Pole down the eastern seaboard of North America, he pretty much figures out where he can find it and asks for a diving bell to search for the monster in the depths of the ocean. Now, Elson finds the Rhedosaurus deep in the sea, and the excitement of the find is ultimately squashed when the Rhedosaurus swallows the diving bell, basically killing the professor. But there's no time to mourn because the Rhedosaurus makes his way to Manhattan and goes ham. After the destruction of several buildings and streets and all of this, reports come in about emergency shelters, National Guard deployment, and hysteria. The reports from the newspapers say that 180 people were known to be dead, with 1,500 injured. So it's a pretty massive casualty event. But eventually, a weakness is found with the monster, his neck. You see, the skull is too big for any normal artillery to puncture and penetrate. But its neck, on the other hand, is rather fleshy. However, with the creature bleeding from a neck wound that was given to it by a bazooka, the blood unleashes a prehistoric contagion that starts to make a lot of the National Guardsmen sick. The problem is that if the creature is set on fire or is bled out, the contagion will spread, very likely exponentially. Fire would be the worst thing to do because of the smoke that would carry the particles far and wide. So Nesbitt comes up with an idea. Shoot it with basically a radioactive isotope, and the radiation will burn out the infection and make the creature easier to kill with less danger to people. The Rhedosaurus comes ashore again and approaches Coney Island, and Nesbitt and Corporal Stone, a sharpshooter, will fire the isotope into the beast's neck from atop the Cyclone roller coaster. Now, I know this plan will work, and you know why I know this will work? Well, because Corporal Stone is played by Lee Van Cleef. So he's kind of, like a badass sharpshooter is played by a badass actor. So, they load the gun with a grenade that contains the isotope inside it. Stone hits the creature right in the neck wound, which causes it to thrash about. And Nesbitt and Stone get down from the roller coaster just before the Rhedosaurus completely destroys it, and the whole thing burns down. The Rhedosaurus ultimately dies, and New York is saved. But it's time for 3 things that I like about this movie. And I start with, well, the start of the movie. I think the start of this movie is a very good setup for the movie as a whole. And honestly, it's something that would be duplicated a few times over. While the movie as a whole and the creature itself is an inspiration for Godzilla, the Arctic, or the generally northern setting, is also how movies like Gamera, the Deadly Mantis, and the Giant Claw all start. They also all have a basic building toward the creature ultimately being seen by the masses. And while you can say this movie also borrows from The Thing from Another World from a couple of years earlier, the primary difference is that The Thing stayed in the North Pole. This movie and those that follow only opens in the North and then comes south to the populated areas, either New York City for most of them or Tokyo for, say, like Gamera. So yeah, this movie is every bit as influential as The Thing, and maybe a little bit more so considering this movie gave us popular worldwide creatures like Godzilla and Gamera. And of course, with Godzilla, any other creature that appears in a Godzilla movie after that, I mean, it's all a family tree that leads back to the beast from 20,000 Fathoms. But next, there are a couple of funny things in this movie that specifically are played for comedic and kind of levity. First, one of the fishermen from Canada that had a close encounter with the Rhedosaurus is kind of a surly old fart. And when he hangs up on Nesbitt, who tried to reach out to him to get his account of what he saw, the operator who connected them goes almost out of her way to talk about how much of a curmudgeon this guy is and how nobody seems to like him. I mean, the operator goes overboard with this when she totally did not have to, and it's actually pretty funny. Second, when we first meet Professor Elson, he is so excited to take a vacation for the first time in 30 years. And I think in some ways it's him saying that he's retiring, but it could also be the fact that Lee is now there to do some of his work. But either way, he's desperate to get the hell out of Dodge to go on vacation. And he's just about to go on vacation when Nesbitt shows up with the other eyewitness from Canada for the monster. And this leads to him postponing his vacation and, well, sadly, he ultimately dies. But it's like the quote unquote 3 days until retirement trope that exists in cop shows and movies. It's just, these are just small things in both of these lighter comedic moments but it informs so much about the characters, and it also becomes a realistic element to this movie. It also helps show that the movie, while taking itself fairly seriously, is not taking itself so serious that it can't have a little fun in these earlier parts of the movie. But then, thirdly, the scene in which the Rhedosaurus makes landfall on Manhattan is the stuff of Hollywood monster movie perfection. People are running away, screaming, driving away from the creature only to get picked up in their cars by it. A blind guy gets trampled by people running in the opposite direction. A single cop tries to play hero by shooting at it, only for him to be picked up and eaten. I mean, the monster is knocking stuff over, tossing cars out of the way. It's glorious. And this is what makes Ray Harryhausen an all-time great special effects guy. And it's something that has either been homaged or straight up shown or borrowed directly, borrowing footage directly from, from the movie in commercials, other movies, and so forth. But it's just, everything, even up to The Lost World, the second Jurassic Park movie, uses an element of the idea of the Rhedosaurus kind of crashing through an American city. It's fantastic. But that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com. But don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Wednesday morning Film Seizure podcast, as well as the Monday afternoon Monster Monday show at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new reviews every Friday morning. Next time, we need to talk about more science experiments gone mad and yet another all-time greats of 50 sci-fi horror, 1958's The Fly. Until next week, stay spooky.